Coming up next, a great one. A legendary duo tells us the story of their career and 5 key songs that helped invent the iconic sound of the 80s. So get this, they wrote their first big song when they were teenagers, forming an underground synth duo, and it ended up selling 5 million copies, and it was written and recorded on a cheap synthesizer they bought out of a mail-order catalog. They got bigger with every release, but by the mid-80s, they were called at a moment's notice to write the theme to a famous 1986 film after a test screening went sideways. And it was a last-minute scramble that had them staying up all night to write and record this song. And then when the song was too long, it was over 5 minutes, they fudged the number on the tape, writing down 4.5 minutes so it would get played on the radio, and it became an all-time smash. The interview is coming up next. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you were ever part of the famous Nintendo Sega console war of the late 80s, you'll dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. Click the white button and click the bell. Also, check us out, our podcast. It's up on Apple. It's up on Spotify. All of our interviews and our episodes from all time are up there. Click on the link here or click below. I'm excited to bring you another edition of our show, Retrospective, where an artist or a band takes us through their 5 most iconic songs and give us the inside baseball on their perspective and impact. Today we have Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or OMD for short, and the story of their 80s-centric hits, Enola Gay, Joan of Arc, Made of Orleans, Souvenir, and their top 4 hit from Pretty in Pink, If You Leave.
If you leave, don't leave now, please.
There's some amazing stories here, including Enola Gay that was controversial at the time because it covered the bomb. It ended up selling 5 million copies in Europe alone, and it was recorded on a cheap mail-order synth. This was when they were still just an underground group. And then there's the famous story of If You Leave. They wrote it for Pretty in Pink for John Hughes. It had a terrible test screening. They had one night to come up with a new song, and they fudged the numbers. You're going to get the story next on Professor of Rock. Here it is. I want to ask you guys, I want to go back to the very beginning. What was it for you guys, whether it was a song or an album, something that you saw, or even somebody that you knew that kicked open the door to your mind and made you want to pursue music? Do you remember, like, a moment?
I mean, I think it was Autobahn. Hearing Autobahn by Kraftwerk,
yeah,
on the radio. It was kind of like the first day of the rest of my life. I think we'd just become disenchanted with all the rock and pop music that was around at the time, looking for something different. And yeah, there was this incredible piece by Kraftwerk that sounded like nothing else. It just sounded like the future.
It was the same for me, and what happened was that Paul and I we'd been to the same school together since we were 7, but we were in different years, so we didn't know each other that well. But once we got to 15, 16, this mutual fascination with German electronic music, particularly Kraftwerk, we just decided we wanted to sort of start making something like that. But we had no equipment, so we'd go around to Paul's mother's house back room on a Saturday when she was at work, and just anything we could get our hands on to make noise. And we just started that way when we were teenagers.
When you guys first came out, I mean, a lot of people have said that first record, you know, and really Enola Gay and some of those first ones like Jim Kerr of Simple Minds, you know, and Vincent Clark saying that, you know, hearing Electricity was the thing that inspired him to want to start messing around with synths. Tell me about Electricity and coming together at first as OMD and your thoughts about putting those together.
Well, I think that was probably the first song we ever wrote that was a proper song together.
It was.
I think.
I got all my money together for my 16th birthday and bought a bass guitar. That was the first instrument we had. Paul used to just cannibalize radios and circuits and make things that just made noises. But finally, I think just before Paul became 16, we bought an old Jaguar organ, a strange thing called a Selmer Pianotron. And so that driving bass, that cheesy organ chord, and that plinky plonky melody, that essentially is electricity. And that's the first proper actual song we wrote together. And I think Paul was still 15 when we wrote it.
I was 15, yeah. Yeah, it was the first proper song. And we didn't actually own a synth. Because, I mean, I think when we sort of set out, you know, we were listening to all this German music. I think we probably secretly wanted to be Kraftwerk, but we couldn't be. We couldn't be because we didn't have, you know, the technology at the time was so prohibitively expensive. Yeah. We had to try to make sort of our sort of quirky versions of Kraftwerk, on sort of traditional instruments in a way. I mean, bass guitar, piano, and an organ.
After your debut, you know, Organization came out. I want to talk about Enola Gay. It was meant for the first album, as I understand it, as I've, you know, read. Tell me about writing that song and it coming out and all that kind of stuff.
It grew really from our mutual fascination, because we are a pair of geeks. So we used to build Airfix kit models of aeroplanes, and when we weren't writing songs, we had a train set that we were always building as well, you know. So we had this geeky side to us. And if you're interested...
That's why the geeks loved you.
Yeah, it is, I'm sure. Yeah. So when you're interested in that kind of stuff, you want to write about it, because effectively that's what we were interested in. We were fascinated with... particularly with warfare, not in a sort of celebratory way, almost in a sort of horrified way, that people do the most extreme and horrendous things in the name of their country or freedom or whatever when they're at war. And obviously, when you know something about the Second World War, the aeroplane that dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima, which effectively drew it to a close. To this day, people still argue about the morality of it, but also whether it was the right thing to do. Many still argue that it saved millions of lives, even though it killed 100,000 at the time. So it's, we're fascinated by that kind of grey area of morality. And so we wrote the song in Enola Gay, which it just wasn't quite finished in time for the first album. So we hung on to it. And we had no idea that it was going to be so big. I mean, when it was released. I think it sold 5 million copies just in Europe. It was number one in France and Italy for 3 months.
Exactly, yeah.
But
and Spain.
We did get criticism saying, you know, you're trivializing such an appalling event, and how can you write a cheerful pop song about something? And I suppose really it was just, we weren't trying to celebrate it. We were just writing about it, and we left it there for people to learn and make their own decisions about it. It was important for us, if we were going to try to do new music, to write lyrically about subjects that were more than just, I love you, baby. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We never used the word love in our first sort of 6 albums, I think. Because we just wanted to write songs about what we were personally interested in. And the Second World War was a theme that we've written a number of songs about, because we're of that generation where we grew up with parents who were actually in the war. I mean, my dad was a prisoner of war. My mum was a sergeant in the army. And so we grew up with all these stories about war when we were kids. So it was kind of an area of fascination.
It was so unique because there was no chorus like a lot of your early stuff, you know, and also the melodic parts. I always like to get into this stuff, but recorded with a chord micro preset, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so as you guys were recording and putting it together, you know, tell me about kind of just the organic way that was happening.
Well, the chord micro preset was the first synth we bought. And, you know, we're 2 kind of working class boys. We didn't have any money.
Right.
So we bought the micro preset on a mail order catalog for like £7 something a week.
£7.76 for 36 weeks. And we paid for it out of our dole money. We were both left school and we were unemployed at the time. And, but I mean, it was the most appallingly minimal synthesizer. It had all these presets on it that were like, you know, violin 1, violin 2, trumpet, flute. Everyone just sounded like, basically. So we would end up having to sort of double and triple track the synths put them slightly out of tune, put lots of effects on them.
Yeah, loads of effects.
But actually, again, it's one of those things that sort of, you know, the reality of the minimal rubbishy instruments we had made us push them to their extreme limits to try to get interesting sounds out of them. So again, it was, you know, it was us exploring what we could do on whatever we had to hand, because we didn't have a lot of money. So.
Yeah, and it's a 50s progression too. The way that you guys, it was like what was used in old doo-wop songs, like "Stand By Me."
It's a rock and roll chord sequence, and also it's relentless. It's the same 4 chords all the way through: the melody, the verse, the middle 8. It doesn't vary.
Never changes.
It's really simple.
Commodore 64 used it for a game called SYNTH back in the day.
Yeah, I had a Commodore 64.
Well, I want to ask you about Architecture and Morality, 4 times platinum. It actually is kind of you guys' pet sounds, if you will, you know.
I mean, we love the title because we saw it really as a metaphor for our music, because the architecture was the simple but quite primitive rhythm drum machines and synthesizers. But we tried to work on top of that, if you like, the morality, which was the human and emotional element, which was the melancholy that you mentioned at the top of the interview, which it was, and in a strange way, I think it was the juxtaposition, the contrast between the rigidity of the drums and the programming and the choirs and the melodies and the singing. There was this sort of disconnect in the middle, which created the melancholy. That's where we operated, between the machines and the humanity.
And the mellotron.
We got into a whole, I mean, that was the sort of theme for the album, really. We got into all these choral, we discovered these, the mellotron. Before we got the mellotron, like Souvenir was the first time we'd used those kind of choirs, because a friend of ours, Dave Hughes, who was in the band, was making tape loops at Amazon Studios in Liverpool of these choirs, and he said, "Can I use your studio to make loops?" He had all the tapes, and so I said, "Yeah, you can use the studio as long as I have a copy." After I'd done all these loops for him, I kept a copy and then made Souvenir out of all.
It was that chorus, right?
It was
the choir.
That
the choir, that was. In fact, Andy Bell of Erasure, when I was interviewing, he said that's the only song that can bring him to tears every time he hears it.
Oh, that's
Have you ever
sweet.
heard that?
I've not heard him say that.
Cool?
Andy Bell's a friend of mine, actually.
Yeah.
But,
he wouldn't admit it to you to your face.
Say it to my face.
The video also was so great, you know.
Yeah.
The music video, but
it was actually done by Peter Saville, who did all our sleeves.
Yeah. Where did that song come from? Like Souvenir, because it's such a.
Well, the thing was from these choirs, because there was only certain notes that Dave had done that I could loop properly, and so I kind of printed them on a 16-track tape, just 1 note per track. And so they were just, all of these notes would play for 4 minutes. And so I used the faders on the mixing desk to push up, to make chords to a click track. And it was, I could only choose the ones that sounded good. So the chords made themselves, because they were the only options. And so when I had the chords, it was just like, everything else just seemed to just kind of drop on it naturally.
Yeah. And your voice in it sounds, so innocent.
Yeah, it's kind of, well, I've got a much softer voice than Andy, which,
yes,
you know, and I'm kind of a reluctant singer, really. I much prefer Andy doing the vocals.
But that's why it works, because Paul has this quite tentative, soft voice. And I mean, he triple-tracked himself basically for security purposes.
I did,
which gave the voice this sort of shimmering glow to it, which sat on top of those sort of wobbling choirs as well. So the whole thing has this beautiful, airy, dreamy quality to it. Yeah.
I want to jump into Joan of Arc. And, of course, Maid of Orleans. You know, really kind of 2 songs that were really brother and sister in a way. Biggest selling song of Germany, for Germany in 1982.
Yeah, definitely was.
But it was kind of your Mull of Kintyre, as you guys have said in the past.
We said that, yeah, I guess it is.
But tell me about that.
When we were touring with the second album that had Enola Gay on it in France, the support band were French, and they said to us, "Oh, this is like the Joan of Arc historical venue tour. You're going to all the cities that are associated with her." And I kind of lodged in my head. So when we got back to Liverpool, being a geek, I went to the library and started researching. And it's one of the things, you know, Joan of Arc, the more you try to learn, the more you can't discover, because she's being hijacked by everybody who had an agenda, you know, Republicans, nationalists, fascists, socialists, feminists. Everybody's got their own read on what they thought Joan of Arc stood for or who she was. So, again, because we're fascinated by this sort of, if you like, uncertainty, wanted to write a song. Wrote a song, wasn't sure it was working, decided to write another one. That's why there's two of them. And it was actually Paul and the rest of the guys of the band said...
Me and Martin said, yeah, what happened to that other song? I've got that tune stuck in my head.
That was the waltz. That was the Maid of Orleans waltz, which I was going to throw away. And the guys in the band kind of rescued it from the trash and said, no, we got to record that one too.
We're going to do this one.
Now, is it true that it was written around the 550th anniversary of her death?
The song Joan of Arc, the other one, not the waltz one, was written on the exact day, the 550th anniversary of the burning of Joan of Arc.
Wow. If You Leave was the big pop hit, which leads us to that right now, you know, in 1986.
Was that the song where you thought, damn, my secret's out now, they're not my own private band anymore?
It was, right. My little outcast group of friends, we were kind of like, secret's out, right? You know, like you said, you know, now other people, this is our band, you know, and you always kind of feel that connection, right?
Yeah, and belong to so many people.
Yeah.
And you really belong to me.
But If You Leave did, it's one of the greatest love songs of all time.
If you leave, don't leave now, please.
I want to talk about that because that was such a huge song. John Hughes changed the song in the end, right? After the test screening.
Well, he changed
the ending.
He changed the ending of the film.
Film. Because the test screening came back and they wanted her to get with Andrew McCarthy, Molly Ringwald.
That's right, yeah.
And so...
But we'd written the song for the opposite ending of the film, basically. And we landed in LA. We had a 2-inch master tape ready to mix. We'd recorded something, we were ready to mix it. And then we got to mess it, because we had like 2 days in LA that we were going to mix this track, and then we were going off on a 2-month tour or something with the Thompson Twins.
Yeah, because you were about to start a tour, right?
Yeah.
Like 2 days from starting a tour when that happened.
So instead of mixing it, they said, the song doesn't work. We've changed the end of the movie. The lyrics don't work anymore. Can you write us another one? And we're like,
are you kidding?
Today? Yeah, today. We're like, oh, yes.
And not even that. They wanted you to write it at 120.
It had to be the same tempo as Don't You Forget About Me, because they filmed the prom scene using Don't You Forget About Me.
Yeah.
But of course, in the end, it didn't matter, because when we saw the final edit, they were like, none of these people are dancing on our beat. It didn't matter what tempo
it was. A little bit off.
It was a little bit off.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was nuts. Yeah, we just went into the studio off the top of our heads, spent all day and most of the night writing If You Leave, not knowing whether it was going to work or not. We put it on a cassette, gave it to a motorcyclist who drove it over to Paramount and put it at the front office at 4 a.m. We went to bed 8:30 in the morning. We had a call from our manager. John Hughes loves it. Can you go and finish it? And we're like, we've just gone to bed.
We haven't slept in 2 days as it is.
Yeah. And you're going to go out on tour, on this huge tour after.
Yeah. So it was really lucky that we managed to write what turned out to be a really good song and a popular song, because, 9 times out of 10, when you're in under that amount of pressure, you'll come up with not the right thing.
The other thing that's great is it has such a long life, not only because everybody had to have that moment at their prom. I said that in the intro, but it's so true. Like no other song would do for a prom thing. It had to be If You Leave, because you saw it on the silver screen, but it was a song that did it. I mean, the movie was great, but it was the song that made you go, I've got to have that experience, that moment. Like I said, It didn't live up to my dreams, The Prom, but that 4 minutes and 31 seconds did because of the music. That's how powerful music is.
The idea really of the lyric was that actually it's about the end of high school. And that's, I think, why somehow unconsciously it resonates with people, because it's effectively, it's like Don't Leave Now. It's like, it's the ending of your childhood and all the people you've grown up with and the place you've been going to since you were whatever age.
Please don't take my heart away. Promise.
It's a rite of passage song. It's the fear of what comes next. And that's kind of what we were trying to capture. So although everybody's partying at the prom, again, there is this OMD melancholy and fear of what comes next, you know?
Right.
And what's interesting about Pretty in Pink is that it's almost reached a kind of a cult status in terms of movies.
It was funny as well that the band, the 1975, recorded their first album in my studio in Liverpool, and I met Matt Healy, and he was like, "Oh my God, you know, you wrote If You Leave, and the Pretty in Pink soundtrack is like my heart." And I'm like, "Really? Yeah, that's your soundtrack?" He's like, "Yeah, we want to be like that."
He said that. He said, our first album, we wanted to be the John Hughes soundtrack.
Yeah.
And this album feels like a soundtrack.
That's exactly what it
to
is.
a John Hughes movie.
It's exactly stylistically what we were going for. And that's because that's the way that I perceive my adolescence. Mm-hmm. Everybody loves to have a really romanticized, antiquated view of their past, of their teenage years. When you're living it, you romanticize it because you're a teenager.
Right.
So you don't need any more nostalgic elements. Because when you're a teenager, everything's like the apocalypse, isn't it? So it doesn't really matter. And then as you get further away from that time, as you get older, you know, you romanticize what it was like. You fill in all of the gray areas with, you know, idealized whatever. That's the way that I perceived my life. And that record is, like we said, we wanted to make a soundtrack to the John Hughes movie about our lives.
You gotta say where else.
Tell you another secret about the song is, it was actually 5.5 minutes long. And we edited the end and we could not get it short enough. And they said, it cannot be longer than 4.5 minutes. The radio won't play it. So we did an edit that was actually like 4 minutes, 48 seconds. And we just wrote 4:31 on it. So it's not actually 4:31. It's much longer.
Hey, leave us a comment about OMD. Man, they had so many great songs. Enola Gay, one of the most iconic of the 80s. What are your memories of these songs? What else? What other artists should we cover in retrospective? 5 songs that will tell their story. Let us know below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.